Good evening, traveler. Some of you might already know the smiling man, Creepypasta, but did you know that this tale is not just a piece of fiction, but is actually the real accounts of a man walking home one night? In this journey, I'll reveal to you the hidden backstory of the smiling man. But before we get there, I would like to read The Smiling Man by Blue Title in full for the uninitiated. So sit back and enjoy. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the U.S. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park, quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street on my side was the silhouette of a man, dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance-walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still until I could make out his face. His eyes were open, wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments I felt relieved until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, staring at him, and then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated, tiptoed steps as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone. Except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen, as the smiling man crept toward me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling, and then, after what felt like forever, he turned around very slowly and started dance-walking away. Just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off of the side road and back onto a better-lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile. But he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk, he didn't look high, he looked completely and utterly insane, and that's a very, very scary thing to see. Truly chilling stuff. Some of you may have heard this story before, but the scariest part of it all is that it's a true story. I did some digging and found some more details on this story. The story is written by a Reddit user named Blue Title. I was unable to come up with their real name, but the lack of them publicly displaying it in an easy-to-find place makes me believe they'd like to stay anonymous. The encounter took place in Seattle, Washington. Blue Title stated that they're rather short, allowing the smiling man to tower over them. They said he never got close enough to touch them, but believed that if the smiling man really did want to catch them, he'd have no problem chasing them down. When describing the smiling man, Blue Title said they believed that he was middle-aged, with white skin and dark, slightly graying hair. The smiling man's height is estimated to be 6'2" to 6'5". When asked about his face, Blue Title said he had an intensity to his eyes, and he never once made eye contact with me. Looking at his face, there was nothing harmless about the expression. To add further context, Blue Title says, "When I first saw him, he seemed so completely lost in his own world, but was clearly not only very perceptive, but paying close attention to me. Basing this off of how well he timed his movements with my looking away from him, I saw him when he was pretty far away, and he was dancing even then. It wasn't until he was fairly close that I realized it wasn't a drunken dance, but a very fluid and graceful one." Blue Title, after the encounter, had several nightmares about the smiling man. Speaking about one specifically, they said, "I had a dream, probably a month or so after the incident, where I was dancing with him, with that same creepy smile stretched across my face." Blue Title doesn't believe that the smiling man was a supernatural being. They think that the man was either on drugs or putting on a show to scare them. While they do think it's possible for the smiling man to have been on drugs, they're quoted as saying, "I've seen the homeless and broken-down junkies galore. You can't walk around at night in the city without running across them." Trust me when I say that there was absolutely nothing about this man that made me think he was one of them. His dancing was graceful and fluid. He was extremely fast, and even though he never looked at me, moved exactly when I looked away from him. He was way too focused and in control to be high, and way too sinister to simply be following me looking for a handout. The one thing with their theory that has a hole, which they pointed out, is if the smiling man was simply trying to scare them, then why was he dancing in the street before Blue Tidal was even in view? Since the story's original posting, others have come out claiming to have experienced similar encounters. Well, I hope you never encounter the smiling man yourself. I hope you enjoyed this tale on the Express to the Void. If you made it this far, think about subscribing to book your next ticket on the Express. Until next time, however, get off my train.